Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today, we're going to talk about the most underrated worlds in Wizard101. Now, I would like to say, underrated is a term that's thrown around a lot. You can't go 5 seconds without someone telling you, oh, this is underrated, this is overrated, all of these types of things. I don't tend to like actually using this term, but at the very least, there's definitely times and places to use it. Things that are actually pretty good and either aren't viewed as good by a general audience, or just are glossed over in regards to looking at other things. Today, I wanted to go into some of the most underrated worlds, in my opinion, in Wizard101. I wanted to go over why I think they're underrated, and what I think makes them good despite not having that general opinion. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Make sure to hit the sub button and, leave in the comments either your prediction of what you think I'm going to say or your own opinion. What do you think is the most underrated world? But let's get into it. So to start off, this is one that I never thought I would ever say is underrated. For the longest time, Mooshu has been one of my favorite worlds of all time, and you can see that in my earlier ranking videos worlds and videos like that. I always had Mooshu ranked near the top, and I always thought that Mooshu was a really highly rated world. But in this case, I actually fell for a little trick, a little psychology term called false consensus bias. Now that sounds like a long word, but don't worry about it. It's exactly what it means. Basically, I thought that everyone just liked it. I thought that this was a great world. Everyone in Wizard101 thought it was a great world, top 3 world. And then I realized as time went on that that wasn't the case. I definitely found this out when making those ranking videos because I always had Mooshu near the top and everyone was always like, Noah, why do you have Mooshu near the top? And this is when I realized, okay, so Mooshu isn't as liked as I thought. Now, what's the general opinion on Mooshu? I don't think it's necessarily negative. I think a lot of people see Mooshu as just their world. Most of the complaints I actually see are the fact that there is too much walking in Mooshu, and that's an interesting thing in my opinion, and something I have never really considered because there's a lot of walking in this game in general, but it's something that a lot of people actually told me, is that one of their main reasons why they disliked Mooshu was the amount of walking and the back and forth kind of style of it. But that is the general opinion I think that a lot of people had. In regards to otherwise, definitely it doesn't look the best, and I understand that. Mooshu definitely looks pretty dated. I mean, the bamboo here, this 2D bamboo that you can kind of see, looks really ugly, let's be honest. Like, it doesn't look good, and it definitely shows that it was made like 15 years ago now, or however long it's been since it's been made. Now, why do I think this world is underrated? Well, there's a few reasons. First off, I'm gonna say it, I think the people who say that there's too much walking are the people who don't use marks or just generally don't know how to navigate this game. This world isn't that much more walking than literally any other world, so I don't know why that would be a complaint per se. And using a mixture of teleporters and mark locations, you're not going to have any more trouble with this world than you would with literally any other world. But generally, I think Mooshu is a really good world in regards to story, in regards to aesthetic, in regards to music, and I think a lot of people tend to gloss over that. I don't think a lot of people hate Mooshu with a passion, but a lot of people don't have it in their top 5, which has always been surprising to me. Again, I really love Mooshu, and I think it's really just that simple, is it's just kind of glossed over, and I can see why, especially since it's surrounded by like Marleybone, which is an amazing world that most people in this game generally like, and Dragonspire, which is generally a dislike world, but it's a more epic finale world. I can see why this would be glossed over a little bit. It's definitely, in my opinion, the least impactful of Arc 1, or at least feels the least impactful in regards to Arc 1, because you have Wizard City, the very first world you enter, then Krokotopia, which, the game is still fresh, Marleybone, which is really good, and then Dragonspire, which is a finale. Mooshu just kind of feels like a bridge between the two, and I can definitely see why a lot of people wouldn't really look at it as super important. The final thing I want to say here, just to kind of wrap this up and why I think that this is underrated, is the fact that I think Mooshu really is actually a good world with solid potential. I know I've kind of said that, but I really implore you to give it a chance. Give it another chance, because realistically, as a kid, you might have experienced something different than you've experienced now. And I know that not every world is for everyone, but I at least think that some people could like this world more than they do. And if KingsIsle eventually decides to do a graphic update of this world, I could potentially see this becoming a favorite for a lot of people. So that's really it. Let's move on to the next world. Now, the next world is actually a favorite of mine, and one that I do understand why it's disliked, but I still like it nonetheless, and that is Zafaria. Now, Zafaria is in another weird place, in my opinion, where it's after Celestia, which is kind of brutal, and then Avalon, which is a really, really good world. Not a lot of worlds in Arc 2 are actually liked, but definitely Zafaria is kind of more neutral to most people. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, the fact that it just kind of feels there. It's pretty short and generally doesn't have you advancing all that much in regards to strength or plot, at least. But Zafaria is kind of just there, and I do understand that. That's kind of the general opinion on it, is Zafaria is just kind of there, not hated, not liked, and that's understandable. It's kind of middle of the road. But I've always had a special place in my heart for Zafaria, for definitely a few reasons. The first being the aesthetic is just amazing. It's beautiful. I definitely think it's a step up from what we've been seeing. For example, like Celestia still kind of looks pretty ugly, and it looks similar to Arc 1 worlds. This is kind of where Arc 2 starts getting really pretty, at least in my opinion. Like, Avalon looks amazing. Azteca, no matter what you say about it, also looks amazing. And Chrysalis definitely has some of the highest graphics in Arc 2. Zafaria is kind of the progenitor of that. It's the beginning of this, this journey, which is really cool. I do like it. I mean, just look at it. It does look really beautiful. On top of that, the vibes are just immaculate. Like, the music is really, really good, and generally it's just really fun. It's not too long, it's not too short, and I just think it deserves a little bit more praise than it gets. I don't even see people talking about Zafaria generally, and I think that it's a really good world, and at least deserves to be in some people's top 5. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that this will change when I say this. I don't think I've ever seen Zafaria in a top 5 favorite worlds list, and I think that that's really a mistake. At least someone should really like this world, and I do genuinely enjoy it. I think it's a really good world, and I think it's definitely underrated. Next up on our list is Mirage, and this actually probably shouldn't surprise anyone. It is pretty well known, at least in my opinion, that I really love Mirage. Mirage is such a good world. Amazing characters, amazing music, amazing look-wise, like it does look really good, and it doesn't feel too long, doesn't feel too short. Really, it's what I would consider one of the closest to a perfect world. It always makes my top 5 list. Definitely, I think it's a top 3, not entirely sure, haven't ranked them in a while, but I do genuinely love this world. But it's actually not that popular. I wouldn't say it's unpopular, it is to some people, but to a lot of people, it's definitely just there. As with a lot of these worlds, and I've noticed I've been saying this now, is the fact that it's kind of a bridge between worlds, right? Where like Mooshu is kind of in between Marleybone and Dragonspire, so it looks a little bit less impactful by comparison. Same with Zafaria in between Celestia and Avalon. Similarly, this one is in between Polaris and Imperia, and it doesn't really surprise me that it's overlooked a lot. Polaris is pretty much universally considered one of the best worlds in this game. Like, I'm sure it makes almost everyone's top 3 list, and that is something that I would never disagree with. I love Polaris to death. Imperia is generally disliked, but on top of that, it's especially noteworthy in people's minds because it's when you reach the level to get Dragoon gear, and that is definitely an extremely impactful milestone in Wizard101 now. On top of that, there's a lot of memorable characters. It's the final world in the arc. Imperia is just very memorable, and Mirage is kind of in this middle point. It's not the first thing that comes to your mind when you think Arc 3. In fact, when you think Arc 3, you probably think of quite a few things before Mirage. And I think that that's just why it's underrated. It's just generally looked over. But I will say, Mirage is one of my favorite worlds of all time, and definitely I think people should try to give it a shot at least. Beyond simply just the story, I think generally it has a lot to offer in terms of fun. The enemies don't feel too difficult, but there are challenges interspersed within it. They don't feel too easy, such as maybe some of Polaris does, and the quest length is pretty good. It's not too long, it's not too short, it's what I would consider my ideal world length to be. I think this is some of KingsIsle's best work in terms of jokes, in terms of characters, in terms of writing. Just generally, it's some of KingsIsle's best work, and I don't think it's actually viewed as that by a lot of people. I think a lot of people gloss over it, and I think that it doesn't deserve that, right? It deserves a little bit more attention. Next is the world that I was thinking of when I created this video. When I was thinking, what are underrated worlds in Wizard 101? One comes to mind, and that is Karamelle. And this one for me is incredibly obvious because Karamelle is pretty universally disliked, which is frankly incredibly surprising to me. Karamelle is generally viewed with disdain for a few reasons. First off, the fact that, at least in my eyes, there's no real main villain. You have the Aberrant Paradox, but there's no, like, main villain introduced here. In every other arc, we had that, like, say, Arc 1, we had Malistaire, Arc 2, we had Morganth, Arc 3, we had Grandfather Spider. Here, there isn't really a main villain to worry about. I guess you could technically consider the old one that, but realistically, he's not portrayed as a villain, at least for this, and that makes the stakes feel a little bit less. It feels more mysterious, and I think that people dislike that a lot. The second and biggest thing is obviously the childish aesthetic. A lot of people hated the childish aesthetic, hate how it was bright and vibrant, and, you know, had this, like, fairy tale, crazy, outlandish, childlike theme, and a lot of people just did not like that. And I definitely understand that, but I do genuinely think that this world is severely underrated. The first thing I'd like to mention is simply that this game is childish. It's a childlike game, and it never should be described as, you know, adult themed. And I think that Karamelle really just kind of capitalizes on that. But I think the most important thing to mention here is the people that say that Karamelle is bad because of how childish it is are the same people who don't listen to the story. Basically, you're judging a world based on purely aesthetic alone, in which case you shouldn't like most worlds in this game, because most worlds in this game don't look that good, and I think that that's an issue. I think a lot of these people are just looking at it like, okay, it's childish, I'm an adult, you know, pull up my bootstraps, I'm a big boy now, and a lot of people are thinking in that vein. But you really shouldn't, especially if you pay attention to the story. The story of Karamelle is actually, like, super impactful with a lot more adult-like themes, like, you know, the treatment of workers and stuff like that. And a lot of these themes that reign throughout the entire world are super interesting and cool to look at, I think. And I think that this world definitely has a lot of potential. But just beyond that, I mean, beyond just the childish aesthetic, I genuinely think this is one of the prettiest looking worlds in the game. The questline isn't that long. I would say actually my main complaint of this world is how short it is. This world you can finish in like 5 to 6 hours. It's a really short world. But the main thing I just want to say here is I think that this world is looked at through an entirely unfair lens. A lot of people just say it's childish, write it off. This world is really good. And I've said that since it came out. A lot of people don't like it. A lot more people should give it a chance. And I would definitely say it's underrated. Just generally how much people dislike it versus what it is a little bit ridiculous in my opinion. But that's really it for today. That's what I wanted to go over. I wanted to go over, you know, each world, what I think is underrated. I am very curious. What do you think about my list? And what are your opinions for underrated Wizard101 worlds? I am very curious. But that is otherwise it. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.